All right, we're ready to go live. Okay, we're live. So, welcome everyone. First and foremost, you may notice that I'm not Houston. I am Jon Bach, founder and president of Puget Systems, stepping in for Houston as the host today. Significantly less experience, significantly less beard. But I have the pleasure of being joined today by not just one, but the entire labs team. We're joining you here from Seattle. Thankfully, we can be back to be called the rainy Seattle, not the on fire Seattle. It's a nice change back to normalcy for us here. But I'm joined by the entire labs team. These are the minds responsible for all of the benchmarking and the articles and the content and the training, all of that work that goes into supporting the workflows that we support. And we're here because it's a big deal week for us. This is the week that the Nvidia 3080 has launched on Nvidia's new Ampere architecture. And it's turned out to be a pretty monumental launch. It's not very often in this industry you see something this exciting, something this big of a performance jump. And so we're all here to talk through what that means in all of these industries that we work in. And that's a lot for us to take on in 1 hour. So we're going to go straight into it, and we'll talk for a few minutes about. We'll go through each of the labs team here and talk about what did you find, what are the key highlights, what are the big takeaways, and then after talking for a few minutes, we'll take your questions. So absolutely, as you have questions, put that in the chat. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and then we'll wrap up with just any more general questions, and I'll take it from there. So let's get started. So William, you're on my top left here. You're responsible for our rendering and photogrammetry work. What have you seen with 3080?
The rendering side in particular is phenomenal. I don't know if you can throw up the charts here in a moment, but
Sure.
we're seeing performance in GPU-based renders. So not talking CPU-based renders, but the GPU-based ones like Octane, Redshift, V-Ray Next, the GPU side. There's a CPU side there as well. Anywhere from double the 2080 in some cases, or 2080 Super, excuse me, all the way up to closing in on double the 2080 Ti. I It's a phenomenal boost, especially considering that you're talking about a card that is the same price as the 2080 and 2080 Super were, for, like I said, in the ballpark of double the performance, and performance that eclipses a card that was twice as expensive in some cases, or even actually past the Titan. The Titan was a $2,500 card, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so these 3080 exceeds the Titan, which is 3 times the price. So phenomenal performance. There are some downsides, though. It kind of depends on your situation. If you're just looking for one powerhouse GPU, you're doing some rendering on the side, or you're a smaller studio or something, yeah, they're going to be great. But if you're used to working with a workstation that has 3 or 4 GPUs all stacked together, that's where things get more problematic. 3 or 4 2080 Ti's is still going to be faster than a single 3080, and we'll find out next week, I suppose, whether it's faster than the 3090 or not. But you could stack those because there were versions that had a single fan exhausted out the back. You could put several of those in a system as long as you had enough fresh airflow intake into the system. The Nvidia Founders Edition cards, as they call them, the ones from Nvidia directly, they're not really a reference card anymore, but those have this weird cooler design where there's a fan on the underside and a fan on the top, and the top fan actually blows through to whatever's above it. So if you had cards stacked, you're blowing hot air from one card into the cooling system of the next card, and that's probably going to be a really bad idea. We did some experimenting with the previous generation when the 20 series was out, with multi-fan cards, so not even blowing through, just blowing air back into the system in general. And those, you could maybe pull off 2 in our case with a lot of airflow, but certainly not 3 or 4. And we're looking at kind of the same situation here, maybe even exacerbated. So at least with those Founders cards and a lot of the multi-fan cards that are sort of the first generation from other manufacturers like Asus and Gigabyte, 1 card, great, maybe 2 in some unique situations, but no more than that. However, It's looking like there's some stuff from Asus and Gigabyte that is going to be single fan blower style cards. They're not out yet, but in the coming months, if those release, then hopefully we can get back to where we can stack these. Because yeah, stacking 3 or 4 of these, especially when the 3090s come out with 24 gigs of memory, that's a lot. You want a lot of memory if you're rendering big scenes. That's going to be phenomenal. So kind of cross your fingers for that.
Yeah, so I mean, what are you recommending then today? So if you're in rendering or photogrammetry and you're looking to upgrade your workstation, should you just stick with multiple 2080s or do you make a jump and just do a single 3080?
I think it depends. So photogrammetry is a little bit of a different story, and I can cover that in a minute. Rendering today, if you want a workstation that you were only planning on 1 or 2 video cards anyway, then by all means get a 3080 or wait a week and get a 3090 if it's in your budget. If you want something that is a real big powerhouse, if you have to have it today, there are still 2080 Ti's available out there. It's hard to find, but there are some. You could still get a stack of those, or again, wait and see if we can get blower style cards in the coming months. That's going to be pretty important if you want that much horsepower. So it really kind of is it's one of those transition periods where for some users, great, jump right now. For some users, kind of wait and see probably.
Yeah.
Because there's also entirely, I mean, Quadro cards, for example, which those aren't a part of this launch, but Quadro cards from Nvidia tend to have the rear exhaust style coolers, at least have in past generations. So whenever in the future the updates to those come out, that might also be an option for someone that needs to stack multiple video cards, but those will also be probably more expensive. So we'll have to kind of wait and see. On the photogrammetry side, that's a much simpler story. These cards are good. The 3080s are good, but they're not groundbreaking. They basically performed either tied with the best other cards that were out, like the Titans and stuff, or slightly better. So great. You don't have to spend $1,200 on a 2080 Ti or $2,500 on a Titan. You can get one of these for $700 and have just as good a performance. But it's not groundbreaking. It's not a massive increase or anything.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that like future software updates will improve that?
Possibly. I think it has to do, most of the time, photogrammetry uses the video card only in certain steps. A lot of those are still CPU bound in most cases. So there's certain parts where it's using the video card. And so in those areas, yeah, you might see 20% faster performance in one step, but then that's only a quarter of the overall processing time. Suddenly it's only 5% faster overall. That I think is kind of the story with photogrammetry. And also I think it's just not as sensitive to raw, massive performance increases in processing power. There's probably some other steps that are CPU limited even during those GPU accelerated steps. So you're not getting as much potential as if it was just using the video card only.
Got it. And it's worth saying that, we haven't, even here in labs, haven't had access to, we have yet to test quad 3080s because the supply is so constrained. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I'm hoping that like the FE cards, that like if all 4 of those blowers stack right on top of each other, the air will just go straight through, and they built in enough headroom into the fans that like they can just spin up a bit. Because like if it's just loud, the people who are getting quad GPU systems, usually they don't care about noise. So if it just ramps up, great.
Yeah. The Founders Edition has 2 potential issues with cooling. One is that, and maybe there's enough airflow. But the other is that front-facing fan with the back plate behind it, there's no channel for airflow. It looks to me like there'll be a millimeter maybe for airflow.
But that's what we deal with right now with blower-style cards. And those are doing all of the airflow through that one fan.
Most blowers, though, have specifically extra clearance. They're usually slightly recessed around that fan to give you, half a centimeter or something, a little bit at least, to pull air in. And actually, an interesting thing, it looked like on the pictures I was seeing from Asus and Gigabyte on their potential 30 series blower cards, it looked like they actually had the venting on the back end of the card, which would be even better. Like pull air in directly on the back end of the card, push it through and out, so that you don't have to worry about as much space. Be kind of cool.
So for any of you, I think, William, you probably had the most physical hands-on time because, as you can see, our labs team is all work from home. We have a great setup here. I get to be the one in the office today. But we have a great setup where they can all remote in, and so we have these test beds, and everyone remotes in from home via our VPN. But I think William, you've probably had your most like physical hands-on time. Can you tell, like, as you hold your hand over a Founders Edition, or no, I guess we don't have a 3080 Founders Edition. It'll be interesting to see, like, does most of the heat come out the back, or does most of the heat come out the top? Like, how does that distribute cooling wise?
The Yeah, that will be interesting. The diagrams Nvidia has put out looked like you had the one fan blowing through, so basically almost all the airflow from that coming through the back of the card and out. And then the fan on the front, it looks like it vents some out the back and then also some between the fans and some out the edge of the card. So it's kind of like a more traditional blower where it just pushes air all directions on that second fan. So it's I think if you were going to try and pull off multiple of those Founders Edition cards, you'd probably want at least a slot between them, and then suddenly you're pretty much limited to two anyway.
Yeah, which I mean, two of these 3080s should be the same performance as like four 2080 Supers. So like that's still pretty good.
Be cooled, yeah, if they can be cooled, that would be pretty awesome. But I'm crossing my fingers for real blower cards.
Yeah. We have a question in chat from Frank. He says, for real-time graphics applications that aren't doing ray tracing, just doing conventional rasterization, how much improvement? Would that be more, is that a Kelly question?
Yeah.
Okay,
I think
okay. Cool. So Frank, we'll come back to that when we get to 3D and game development. So, okay. We have to move on because this hour is already flying by quickly. So absolutely, chat, if you have any other questions about rendering and photogrammetry, go ahead and put them in chat and we'll come back to that. But let's hop over to Matt and talk about post-production and photography. So what did you see, Matt?
So it's a mix because a lot of the applications I deal with, there's a lot of Adobe Creative Cloud Suite and then like Blackmagic Davinci Resolve. So many of those are very CPU limited. Most of them have some element of GPU acceleration, but something like Photoshop and Lightroom, those are the two easiest ones to talk about because it's like every GPU is the same. Like you go down to a 2060 all the way up to these new cards or a Titan or whatever, and performance is all about the same. Because even though you might be doing something in Photoshop that's a GPU accelerated effect, like just having a GPU will turn your CPU into the bottleneck immediately because the GPU is just so fast at those things that it doesn't matter if it's a super crazy GPU or a low-end GPU. So like Photoshop and Lightroom, yeah, whatever, you can use it. It's fine. I mean, a lot of our customers like to go up to like a 2070 Super in those applications just as like additional headroom or because they're doing other applications in addition to Photoshop or Lightroom. So like it's not a bad card, not necessary for it, but yeah, not bad, it's fine. The ones where we start to see some increase in performance, I've got to pull up the charts because I can't remember everything on my own. So like After Effects is probably one of the places where it starts to make kind of a difference. For most people, it's going to be kind of like Photoshop where you're going to be CPU bound long before you're GPU limited. So not really a factor, but there's some workflows where people are using a lot of GPU accelerated effects. They're really focused on things that are running on the GPU, and in those cases, it's decent. I believe it was something like 10% faster. Or no, 16
in After Effects. I can put up the chart.
In After Effects. Oh, sure.
I'll stick it up. All right, we have it up.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, because I can't see it because we're just on our Zoom. So yeah, it's 16% faster than 2080 Super. So that's kind of like right on the edge of where you'll start to notice it if you're kind of in one of these situations. So it's noticeable. I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking. And that's again, just because After Effects is so CPU focused that it doesn't really make too big of a difference. I think where the most interesting thing with After Effects is actually the kind of interplay with what William was talking about with Octane, Redshift, especially since that was acquired by Maxon, and After Effects has a lot of integration between After Effects and Cinema 4D now. So hopefully Redshift will become a part of that workflow. And so if you're doing 3D stuff in After Effects, the 3080 could be a big deal in the future if you start to use some of those rendering engines. So for those people that are doing motion graphics, I think it's more of a future-proofing kind of a thing than a massive upgrade at the moment. A step up from that would be like Premiere Pro. I don't know if you want to show up a chart of that or not.
Sure.
It's kind of similar situation. Most of the time, you are CPU limited, so it's not a big deal. If you do happen to be in one of those cases where the GPU is really heavily being utilized, it's pretty good. Let's see, you're looking at here. You're looking at somewhere around a 20% increase there versus the 2080 Super. So again, about on the edge of where it'll really be noticeable day to day. The big thing with Premiere Pro is actually the fact that they've added GPU accelerated decoding and encoding for H.264. So one of the most common codecs that people are processing and exporting to. In the beta, at least, it'll use the GPU for both. In the current release, it only uses it for encoding, so like exporting. And in those cases, you're looking at somewhere around the similar situation where it's, actually looking up here, it's a little bit less. It's like 10% faster. So you can see a little bit of a difference. So like if you're right on the edge and you're like dropping some frames in live playback with H.264, it might be enough to push you over the edge. That still needs a lot of extra testing from us though, since that decoding feature is still just in the beta. We haven't really looked at it. And in fact, in our testing, we had to use the beta, but we were seeing lower performance with the decoding on the GPU. So it's in beta, so like having to use beta stuff, it's not unusual for there to be weird things. It could also just be, we're running on a Threadripper CPU, so it could just be the Threadripper just like forcing its way, processing that H.264 is faster than using a GPU to do that decoding. So we'll see. The last one of mine is probably the most exciting for me, and that's Davinci Resolve. And that Resolve is really known for using GPU heavily. A lot of people misunderstand. They think like everything is GPU accelerated. No, like noise reduction, OpenFX is using the GPU. If you're just like playing back ProRes footage, no, that's not using the GPU. But in those cases where you are, it's pretty darn good. So I gotta look again at my numbers. Let's see here. So compared to like a Titan, so again, I think William was saying like a $2,500 card, it's about 30% faster than a Titan, so that's great.
Awesome.
It's about twice as fast as like a 2060 Super. So at the low end, if you have a 2060 Super now and you want to upgrade to a 3080, oh man, it's going to be twice as fast, which is absolutely amazing. It's actually within like a stone's throw of dual 2080 Ti's. So we're really hopeful that like the 3090, just guessing here performance because we haven't, that's not till next week. But if it, I would imagine it should be pretty darn close to a dual 2080 Ti, which means that you can do in one card what we used to have to do in two cards. And you're going then from, what is it, $2,400 for two 2080 Ti's to $700 or $1,200? What's the 3090? $1,500. So like that's a big cost savings, and you get the 24 gigs of VRAM, which will let you start working with 8K or 12K timelines. And you maybe could put in a second card in the future. That's the big question here. And I think that's one of the most interesting things with Resolve is quad GPU setups are not abnormal. And if we can only do quad GPU or dual 3090, the absolute performance might actually be pretty similar. So we might be looking at one of those situations where the customers of if money's no object, it might not actually be all that much faster if we can't do more than two cards. So just again, like what William was saying. So it's going to be super interesting after we can do multi-GPU testing, after we can do 3090 testing, and seeing how this stuff shakes out. Because in Resolve in particular, it might be like, okay, you can go down to two cards. You get more VRAM, it's cheaper. But from like an upgrade standpoint, for the people that are already on quad 2080 Ti's, it might not be worth it. New systems, it'll be amazing. Plus, anytime you can be on two cards instead of four, I think that's an all-around win. It's less parts to fail.
Yeah.
Less watts, less complexity. Yes.
Yeah, everything is better. So on new systems, even if the quad 2080 Ti is as fast, man, we're gonna jump immediately, and I think a lot of people are just for that.
So something that's interesting to me as you talk about like these applications that are bottlenecked elsewhere. So like upgrading the GPU isn't going to be a big deal. It still is exciting to me. Like let's say you're coming in, you're in post production, and you have like a $3,000 budget for a new workstation. Well, great. Now like you can put more of your budget towards these other things because you're not burning it on the GPU. So just everyone wins. Like whether you don't get concrete value out of a faster GPU, you still get the fact that you don't have to spend as much to get that power, and so you can use that elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's why doing this kind of testing that we do. That's why we have 4 people right now doing all this individual testing, because I mean, places like Tom's Hardware and Antec and all those guys, and like they're terrific for what they're doing, but they're very general testing, and like you just can't get this kind of granularity by doing just a shotgun approach to testing. That's why we're very specific. That's why we have whole articles for one software application.
Yeah,
this time we experimented with like a roundup article, and it seems to be going well. But
it went well, yeah.
But you've got to really dive into the details if you are a Davinci Resolve user or a Premiere Pro user or someone who does rendering or whatever.
Yeah, it really does matter. Well, William had a good point in chat that the other benefit you get out of Resolve is if you're on the free version, you can get so much more out of that one GPU, so you don't have to jump to the paid.
Usually, actually, what I tell people if they're asking about like what kind of an upgrade they should do to their system and they're on the free version, I tell them to pay for the paid version, because the free version does only support one GPU, but the bigger thing is it doesn't support GPU decoding and encoding for H.264. And most of the time, the people that are using the free version, they're working with H.264 footage because that's what most cameras shoot in, that's what their cell phones shoot in, and all that. And so, just enabling GPU decoding is going to make a much bigger difference than any sort of hardware upgrade, and that's $300, and
it's not bad.
And it's not bad, and we're still using licenses from Resolve 12, I think 12.5, and so like it's a perpetual license. You get all the new versions and everything.
That's cool.
And yeah, so the whole single GPU thing to me, I don't think is as big of a deal, because if you're buying multiple GPUs, man, you better be on the studio version before you're even thinking about doing that.
Got it. So is that the number one thing, like the biggest, most exciting thing in your testing that you found was the bump in Resolve?
Yeah. Adobe stuff is just too CPU limited. I mean, a lot of it does use the GPU, but it's again those kind of situations where the GPU is it makes it so fast that it just immediately turns that bottleneck back onto the CPU. So Davinci Resolve is the one, at least the applications that we're testing, that I think is going to be the biggest deal.
And that'll continuously change, right? Like new versions of software come out, and frankly, like as we have new CPU launches, like that balance is going to continue to shift as time goes on.
Well, and like I was mentioning with Premiere Pro, how they just added the H.264 decoding, like that's going to take a lot of work from us, because we're going to have to find out, like, is it better to do both decoding and encoding on the GPU at the same time? Or is it better to leave the encoding for the CPU and do the decoding on the GPU, or vice versa? We actually had that issue in Davinci Resolve. They implemented an update to the Red SDK. So if you're working with Red footage, where you can do debayering, which is turning raw sensor data into a usable image, and decompressing now on the GPU. And we found that on a lot of our systems, it's better to not do that. Even though it's a big deal, it's a big marketing thing at like SIGGRAPH and stuff, it's better to just do the decompressing and leave the debayering on the CPU, because otherwise your GPU will run at 100%, which I guess people like, but it's much better for your GPU to run at 50% and your CPU to run at 70% than to have GPU bottlenecked. So
it's always interesting to me to hear things like that, because it's not even like don't just throw like the piece that we help the most with is like what hardware do you throw at the problem, but like that's only a bit of the equation. Like having the proper licensing, setting up your workflow properly, putting your settings in properly, like that's just as important as having the right hardware. So there's really no getting away from like taking the time to make sure it's done right.
Exactly.
All right, well, we're at time again, so let's keep going around the table. Let's go over to Kelly and talk about 3D design and game development.
All right. So for this round, we did Unreal Engine, and Unreal is in kind of a weird position of being a mix between kind of a game development and this professional high-end software package. Yeah. It kind of straddles the line, does every bit of everything, and that adds to the complexity of needing a test, because it's used for anything from creating little indie games to running giant video walls that The Mandalorian is filmed against and everything in between. So for what we could test, which is any situation where you don't need a Quadro currently, because there's a lot of use cases where you need a Quadro for Unreal. But if you don't currently need a Quadro, there's the 3080 provides a huge boost in pretty much across the board, but especially at higher resolutions. At lower resolutions, you're very CPU bound.
I stuck your chart up, by the way, so they can see that.
Okay. A lot of lower resolution, if you're like doing 1080p with no ray tracing, you're going to be hitting the CPU limitations pretty quickly. So you're not going to see a whole lot of benefit there. But as you go up to 4K, turn on ray tracing, then it really starts to accelerate to anywhere from 60% increase to double the a 2080 Ti even. And pretty much every case, it matched or beat the Titan by a decent amount. So it's a huge improvement for only $700. It's really crazy. And so someone was asking about rasterization. So yeah, it's if you're doing 4K with no ray tracing, you'll see a bigger improvement. If you're 1080, you're not going to see much improvement over 20 series cards. That's just.
I've got a little question. I'll throw mine in. So Unreal Engine, because it's like used in, I mean, obviously game development is where it started. Do your results line up with a lot of like the reviews that are gaming focused? I honestly haven't read a lot of the gaming focused reviews, so I'm just curious.
The ones I looked at, yes, they're pretty close. Yeah.
Cool.
At least on the higher end, the 4K. I saw a lot of reviews going around this time where they were trying to CPU limit the system. So that kind of makes it, because they're trying to show like if you have a 2-year-old CPU or, 2-generation old CPU and this is worth an upgrade, that kind of stuff. So it doesn't really apply to a lot of our industries, but I feel like most of my results are lining up with what most game reviewers were showing. That said, there's still a lot of situations where in both architectural visualization and virtual production where these cards are still limited by VRAM. That's still a huge limiting factor. A lot of people were buying Quadro RTX 8000s just for VRAM. So a lot of situations where you needed a Titan or a Quadro, the 3080 still doesn't help. So hopefully we see something from Quadro in a few months. I don't know. And then also it still doesn't support the sync cards. Quadro sync cards are extremely important in virtual production for the video walls and syncing your camera to the video walls. So without that, it's still limited to green screen applications or smaller video walls where you only need one system to power the whole wall. But otherwise, it's like if you're currently doing a 2080 Ti, you could probably see a big improvement with this if you're doing ray tracing at higher resolutions.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I was blown away when I was seeing the results coming in, and because so my tests are still all manually run. I don't have automation set for it yet, so I'm like clicking the starts and stuff and watching everything happening. I'm like, holy cow, this is crazy. So it was a lot of fun.
You're you saw pretty much the biggest gains out of all of us, right? Even more than like rendering with William, because you were seeing like 2 times faster than 2080 Ti's in some cases, right?
Yeah, some cases double the 2080.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
So do you anticipate with the 3090 coming up with I don't remember how much the 3090 is supposed to have on video memory, but is that going to make a big difference in those applications, or do we still need that sync connector?
So that has the same RAM as the Titan.
It's 24 gigs.
Same amount, yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely going to help for the situations where you need that kind of RAM. But it's not going to help if you need more systems running the simulation. And then, so someone in chat has asked a couple of different questions. DLSS. Currently, DLSS is not in Unreal Engine for the editor. So it can run if you like have an external, like build it and run it as an external application, like a game. So once that gets implemented, which I don't know if I assume they're planning on, that could help even more, because some of the game reviewers were saying, doubling of frame rates by using DLSS. So that could be a huge improvement as well, like give even more performance to these cards. And then he's asking about if two GPUs help. Unreal Engine does not support multiple GPUs, so it does not help at all. I've seen some people use multiple quadros just for the video outputs, to be able to have, like if they're doing one of those big display walls that has 8 screens or something, it'll still output video, but it doesn't, you can't get improved performance by you running off that second card.
Was SLI ever a thing in Unreal? Was it ever widely used?
So it's really stupid. Like when the 20 series was announced, they had that Star Wars demo that they were showing off with all the reflections and all the chrome stuff. They're like, this is running real time in Unreal Engine on 4 Quadro P6000s or RTX 6000s, which is not possible. Like, the only way to get multiple GPUs in Unreal is for Epic and Nvidia to give you a special build of Unreal that you have to get applied for. Or if you're developing a game, once the game is ready, they will help implement SLI.
Well, not anymore.
At that point. Yeah. Well, now Unreal would have to implement it within the code as opposed to Nvidia. So yeah, and there's a lot of Unreal based games that do support SLI, but you just can't do it natively in the editor. You have to get Unreal to help you. So The Mandalorian might have a special build where they're running multiple Quadro RTX 8000s in NVLink to get their performance or whatever. I have no idea, but that's not something you can just do with the available Unreal Engine.
Got it. Well, that seems like that's a big piece of then why you're seeing such a big bump is, everyone's constrained to single GPU configurations. So when we get that much performance bump out of an architecture, then great. Sounds like there's an exciting couple months coming up where, we get to learn about 3090 and we get to learn about, hopefully we get to learn about quadros and what performance increases to see there. So there's still lots of things to be excited about in the future for game developers.
Yeah, for sure. There's going to be, the virtual production groups are just on the edges for the 3090 and whatever Quadro has in store. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Spotify is playing a really strange ad right now. We really need to spring for a premium Spotify account.
Is that just what we're using for the background music? It's just Spotify.
It's just Spotify. Yep. Okay, great. Well, so that's just about time. We're actually doing good on time, so this is good. We're going to be able to get in lots of questions. So, chat, go ahead and keep asking those questions. Let's go over to Dr. Don Kinghorn and talk about machine learning, AI, scientific computing. I know you had a little bit of a rough time, Don, because you're waiting for Linux drivers, and you had very little time to prepare for the stream here today.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was totally disappointed. The Linux driver has supported Ampere A100 since it was released, right? So for a few months. And in the past, usually when the architecture is supported in that Linux driver, then when the GeForce cards or whatever are released, that driver will usually work with that driver, even if it's not officially supported. No dice. I was going, oh, goody, I get to try the card first. Well, I've got some time.
Nope, they're onto your tricks.
Windows driver. Yeah, they're onto it. It's probably, after testing and looking at the card, this is very different from the A100 Tesla. Okay, it's quite different. It doesn't have near the features that the Tesla does. A lot of that stuff is just not available on the card, on the GeForce. But yes, so it was uh, oh my God, that was yesterday, right?
It's yesterday.
Oh, yesterday morning, I'm going, oh man, let me check and see if they've posted any drivers, on the release. And then it's like, boom, okay, here's now a working Linux driver. So I'm checking with Josh and I'm going, oh man, you can pop that card into the Xeon box upstairs.
On launch day. We're doing it live.
On launch day. And of course, I had to fight with it a little bit. And then, I had to purge everything out that I had on there and then get the driver installed and working. And all of the automated tests I had set up were using containers. I was using NGC containers, but I was not using Docker to run the containers. And I hit a glitch with that. So I was like, oh no. So that means I got to manually run everything. So I had to quickly do a full install of Docker and set it up, my typical single user Docker setup. Knocked that out and then manually went in and started running jobs. And I had like a couple of hours, to do the whole shot. But
so what do you find?
Oh, well, okay. The first comment I got on the post, I put that post up last night. I finished testing up by between 10 and 12, and the card had to go back into production for qualification, for cooling, and all that kind of stuff. So then it was like, okay, working everything out and writing stuff up. And the post that I put up last night, the first comment I got, it was OMG, right? And it's like, oh yeah, I agree. It's an incredible card. Like I said, this is not the same as the A100 Tesla. There's some things that are different, but for what people are going to want this for in the machine learning and a lot of the scientific computing world, it's going to be tremendous. Kelly, you had some of the nicest results, almost double like a 2080 Ti. I've got that too.
Nice.
And for kind of a bread and butter standard deep learning application, that doing model training on a ResNet 50, which is kind of a standard benchmark. Heck, John, if can you toss that that chart up?
Okay, we're up.
The big one, the FP32 chart.
Yeah, I have both the FP16 and the 32 on the screen now.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. Cool. That's good. Yeah. You can might be a little bit hard to see what's going on here, but I did the same jobs, the same containers, the same thing. I ran on a RTX Titan that I had in the machine, and then on the 3080. So the lower gold bar there over on the FP32. That's the RTX Titan, and this is with a newer version of TensorFlow, and of course this new driver, a lot of new stuff in here. Performance is improved over a lot of these other results that are in this chart, because this was back on, these were stuff that I've been doing, for quite some time, and that was mostly on TensorFlow 113. Some older builds still using the Nvidia containers, which are really nice, really quite well optimized. But so there's improvements for everything. But yeah, that 3080 significantly beat out that RTX Titan. And if you can see on the chart, this is like I can't read it from there. Yeah, this is images processed per second on this ResNet. It's a benchmark run. It's so the 3080 is like 462 images per second. And if you look on this chart a little bit higher, there's a 2 by 2080 Ti, which is only about 10% better. Okay, so this thing is nearly for this, and this is bread and butter stuff right here. That's the 32-bit floating point, that's single precision training run for a standard deep learning model. and it is nearly this. And this is a $700 card.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's nearly the performance of dual 2080 Ti. So yeah, I was like, I got the number and I went, oh yeah. And I'm looking at the chart and I'm going, oh man, that's two 2080 Ti's. So yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
Nice.
And now, so that was one thing. This is kind of a no-brainer. It's a little bit less memory than the 2080 Ti, and I'm looking forward really to the 3090 because that 24 gigs of memory on that card could be really, really, really handy. In fact, I wasn't able to do my my recurrent network, my LSTM testing because I just kept getting out of memory errors. But yeah, that was a little suspect there. I'm not sure exactly what was going on because I should have been able to run it. Yeah, so that could be huge. You're paying, twice as much money for the 3090, but it may be worth it. But for a lot of people, for a lot of stuff, I mean, certainly anybody that's doing that's learning machine learning and they want a high performance thing so they can do some actual real work, so they can train some real models and without having to wait for weeks for your results. Yeah, this is a no-brainer. This is going to be a great card. The other kind of observation from that chart, I don't know if you took it down.
Yeah, I can put it back up.
Yeah, because I'd like to point something out on there on the half precision on the FP16.
Mm-hmm.
That was interesting right there. Now, in that case, I've got the RTX Titan did it outperformed the 3080. And this is using tensor cores. This is mixed precision with tensor cores, okay? And the thing that's really remarkable here is actually comparing that RTX Titan result to my old RTX Titan result, because the old RTX Titan result is like 600 and something, and the new one here with this new TensorFlow and improvements they made to the utilization of the mixed precision, massive improvement. Okay, so the mixed precision is like it's ready to use, I think, in production for sure, especially with TensorFlow 2. It's got automatic mixed precision tuning, so it will analyze your the flow graph and decide really where you can get away with half precision and where you need FP32. So they're saying that there's no precision loss. So that's really, really good. Big advances being made there. And on the 3080, I suspect that the reason that's not better, because this should have just phenomenal mixed precision performance. Okay, just kind of by the architectural design. And so I suspect that with a little bit more tuning and when things get updated to the CUDA 11 and new drivers, that mixed precision will probably go way up on these cards. I'm optimistic about that. I really do expect that. But yeah, oh man, it's a no-brainer. It's really, really good. For the value, for setting up a box with a single GPU, especially for doing machine learning work, whether you're learning or actually doing real serious work, yeah, man, this has really lowered the barrier to entry for this.
Yeah. Would you say that it's similar to what William was saying for rendering, where if you were on a single or a dual GPU workstation, like absolutely, no question, you should jump.
Yeah.
What about for machine learning and scientific computing for like these big GPU boxes, like quad GPU tower workstations? What What do you advise there?
Okay, that's yeah. I mean, for a lot of stuff, you can use as many GPUs as you've got available, including multiple nodes and stuff like that, right? Before for a workstation like a 4 GPU workstation, yes, I would love to be able to get some of these new cards in there in a quad configuration because it should be incredible. But I expect that even with the 3080, I expect a dual, and this should be doable. I mean, I think we can make that happen. I suspect that will perform as well, or maybe even better than a quad 2080 Ti. You've got fewer cards, so there's more. You always have some of that scale, that Amdahl's law kind of scaling when you increase things out like that, whatever. And it's you lose some performance when you go multi anything. So I'm optimistic that like a dual 3080 is going to be a replacement for a quad 2080 Ti.
Yeah.
I'll answer that question as soon as I possibly can.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm super curious about that.
Because that like as soon as you can give people that performance in 2 cards, then you have about 5 minutes before somebody asks, well, how about 4 cards?
Yeah.
So, yep.
I'll have to go back to those GPU mining things that people did, where they had like expansion cards that like ribbon cabled them out to separate them out. There's on like a wire rack from IKEA.
you're gonna run into there's going to be this thing has these things will just suck in lots of data, right? Mm-hmm. So this is another question I want to answer is, okay, what's PCIe version 3 versus PCIe version 4, whether it actually makes any difference. And it's probably going to be like minimal. It's probably not going to make much difference. But something that I don't even think I should say it, but alternative cooling mechanisms. I'm sorry, guys. It would be nice if we can find a way to get quad GPUs. And actually, we might be able to. No, okay. I just had some weird thoughts. I won't.
We're moving on.
Yeah. Anyway, it's really, really, really good. And this was I had very little time with the card, and I'm blown away by the performance. This is really good. It's really good.
Yeah.
And so I expect to have much better stuff here over the next few weeks. And I'm looking forward to seeing the Quadros. It's possible that the Nvidia GTC conference coming up in October, Jensen might have something to say about that. That would be cool. But I don't know what pricing will be like on Quadros, but I would we'll have to see.
I think we can all hope that it's going to have a shake-up like the consumer side, where you get significantly more performance for the dollar. But like, who doesn't want that, right? So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting because I mean, what is the theory that Nvidia lowered their pricing because AMD has some big stuff, but I feel like AMD has had some competition on like the consumer side, especially in the gaming. It seems like they've really focused on gaming. Unlike a lot of the applications that we test, either like they need CUDA, so like that's not going to work, or even like a lot of the stuff I test, like they support OpenCL, but NVIDIA is just way faster. But on gaming side, that's totally different. Right. So I'm going to be curious to see if they do any price drops with Quadro, or if they keep the same pricing as because these ones. I mean, I guess technically it's not a price drop because we went from the 2080 and 2080 Super to this 3080, but like it has the VRAM bump, it has the much higher performance. I find myself always thinking of it as a 2080 Ti replacement, which means it is a price drop. Right. So I guess technically it's not a price drop, but
depends on how you want to define it.
Yeah, so I'd be curious to see. Well, because even the 3090, which is the Titan replacement, that's cheaper than Titan, right?
Yeah,
that's significantly cheaper.
But it's position-wise, it seems more like it's the combination of a 2080 Ti and a Titan into a single product.
Yeah, but it's only
Titan.
Yeah, but that's only $1,500. The Titan was $2,500, and it has twice the CUDA cores, the same amount of memory,
Mhm.
higher wattage. So I guess we'll see if they release a Titan RTX. Oh, what would they call it? Oh no, the Titan line always has terrible naming.
Titan A.
Remember when we had the
Titan
Titan
Ampere.
that people called Titan and then in parentheses black to differentiate it from the
yes.
previous Titan, and then they released a real Titan black?
Yeah,
Titan
and
XP,
like that, or it was
Temple.
XP.
Yes.
Yeah,
I forget
XP
which
and
one.
Titan X little p and yeah.
Ah.
We're still waiting for the Titan ZZ Top. That's
Yeah.
what we need.
ZZ Top. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah,
Um,
I had one more thing, and
oh, yeah.
Matt, I kind of, you were talking about things being CPU bound.
Mhm.
A lot of stuff. The other thing that I did test because I really wanted to fire it up was I did some molecular dynamics job runs with NAMD, and yeah, this card did really, really well for that stuff. It did really, really well. The thing is, I don't have much discrimination between any other results that I've got because it's really bottlenecking on CPU. I'm thinking that the 3080 for some molecular dynamics workloads is going to be really great in like an AMD, like a Titan, like the 32 core, maybe the 64 core Titan. That might be enough CPU to actually really fully utilize the GPU. I'll try to get that stuff up, as soon as I get a chance to test on that too, because I know that a lot of people are actually really really curious about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's a number of reasons here why AMD could get a bump with a launch like this. We have the PCIe 4 that we haven't yet found an application for needing that, but there's a conceptual possibility there. And then also the need for just more cores, more CPU horsepower to keep up with this shift in bottleneck now.
Yeah, to me, PCIe 4 is going to become a bigger role, not for single GPU, but like quad GPU.
Yeah.
Because, man, PLX chips are terrible. So we don't want to use PLX. And PLX doesn't give you anything if you're loading up all 4 slots anyway. Like, if you only have 32 lanes and you divide it by 4 cards, it doesn't matter if it has PLX or not. They're all going to run at X8.
So you're saying comparing PCIe 4 by 8 to PCIe 3 by 16.
Yeah, because it's double the bandwidth. So if PCIe 3 16 is okay, then PCIe 4 X8 should be okay. So we should be able to do quad GPU at X8 with no slowdowns. But the problem isn't the only platform that has PCIe 4 Ryzen right now?
Yeah.
Like Threadripper doesn't have it, so that doesn't really help. X Series doesn't have it. And so if it's just Ryzen, like that's only 16 GPU lanes, or is it 24 or something like that?
Threadripper had it.
Yeah, I thought
Does Threadripper have it?
Oh,
Yeah, I thought so.
Does it? Man, I don't remember. Now I got to Google.
That's a bad sign.
Right.
Well, so yeah, I think
it's just been such a low thing. Okay, yeah, it does.
So I mean,
it's the new one. It's the TRX4 one had it. The old Threadripper didn't.
Yeah.
So this is really worth underlining because I don't know that a lot of people really appreciate that aren't in the computing field, like as a profession, that just looking at the raw bandwidth numbers isn't like, you really can't stop there. You can't overstate how important it is to simplify your configuration, especially when you're talking about these big, complicated, dual CPU, quad GPU systems. There's so much complexity inherent into the fact that all these things have to be interconnected and talk to each other, which is a lot of places for bottlenecks to hide. But it's also a lot of opportunity for something to fail. It's just more points of failure, more points of complexity. And we've seen our fair share of when we're putting even PLX, which is the equivalent of a network switch on your PCIe bus. Even just adding that has introduced a number of headaches, either in hardware stability or in software support. Are they surmountable? Yes, that ought to be able to be fixable. But always, if you have a choice to go more simple. You're going to have a better time all around. And so what Matt is saying here that I just want to reemphasize is if by going to PCIe 4, it means that you can choose a motherboard that doesn't have PLX, and you're just saying, okay, I'm going to do by 8 connections on all the video cards because at PCIe 4, I have all that bandwidth to work with. Worth it. It's worth it. It's been a long time that we've been working here to try to go to PLX-free motherboards because we love the simplicity and the reliability that results from that.
That's one of the
Yeah.
things that's changing with the next generation of video game consoles. I'm hoping will transition over to PC quickly. Is that the new architecture when something is loaded? Currently in PC, the CPU has to like process everything in, load it through RAM, then process that over to the video card. The new consoles, PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, will actually go straight from storage to the GPU. It will bypass CPU and RAM so things can load faster. So if we can get something like that into PCIe 4 on PC, that'll actually help us take advantage of that speed increase much more.
That kind of exists. AMD did that with the Radeon Pro SSG card, where they put 2 terabytes of NVMe on the card, and it was touted as a 8K editing thing, but you had to basically transcode your 8K footage into RAW on there, which means you could store like 30 seconds of footage and work with 30 seconds at a time. So it kind of existed. It just like we have a card. I don't know if it was ever actually. I think it was for sale at some point, but like it was a cool concept, and it was kind of forerunner for kind of that thing. But like they touted it as like, yeah, you have 2 terabytes of VRAM, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
kind
Well,
of.
Cody says on stream in chat, he says Nvidia announced that feature for PC, and I think he's right. Jensen, I think that was part of the Ampere on consumer side launch. But the thing that was interesting to me was I think that's been around for quite a while on the Tesla side and on the Quadro side. So, I mean, what is the most exciting to me here is by bringing it to the consumer side, we're now opening up this like performance potential to an army of developers for the consumers. And I think even if it did already exist, just the fact that we're like giving a shot in the arm to the whole ecosystem will help it on the professional side.
Well, on the consumer side, I think we need to get more like, even if we can do that, if you're using a platter drive, it's not going to help. Like you're still going to be limited there. Even a standard SSD, 2.5-inch SSD is probably not fast enough. So getting PCIe 4.0 storage would definitely help all that.
Will we finally have a use for NVMe storage?
Well, that's basically both the new consoles have proprietary storage systems that are much faster, and they're like PCIe 4 or faster. So that's what is enabling it to happen on the consoles is that storage.
Good. It'll be great for numbers like that to not just be like bragging rights, but to have like a real world application to need that much. I mean, because who needs 8 gigs throughput for like booting up Resolve?
Right.
Yeah, because all that stuff, the CPU has to, it's basically unzipping it. It's decompressing that stuff into RAM, and then it can do something with it.
And is it using the GPU for like that decompression as well?
Nah.
No?
Oh, that's all CPU.
That's still CPU?
It's almost all single threaded. I don't know if very many like applications that launch with more than one thread.
I think that's what's changing though, right? Isn't it now that it's going to go straight from storage? Right, and it's not going through the CPU subsystem at all. It's going straight to the GPU.
It might just depend on what it kind of data it is, where the ultimate goal end point for that data is going to be. If it's going to be processed on the CPU anyways, then it might just go there.
Yeah, this has to be on the same PCI root complex.
Yeah.
Okay.
I imagine.
So this is where you would have NVMe storage on the same PCI complex, and then it can communicate right to the GPU. But I'm not 100% sure that this is supported in the GeForce or not. That's something that's really curious. But that's definitely a feature of Ampere, and that even goes over the network that way. With the Mellanox interface, they can go straight to the GPU. Which is really, as long as everything is on the same PCI hub.
Yeah.
But Kelly, you made a point, man. When the developers start really taking advantage of this stuff, it's going to be killer. This is a great new architecture. There's no question.
Yeah. Hey, I got super engrossed when we were talking about it. I forgot there was a question I wanted to get to before we're out of time. So I'm going to ask it after we're out of time. But let's talk about it real quick. Power supplies. So Nvidia had recommended at least a 750 watt power supply.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Really, anyone?
Well, these are more power hungry than the previous generation. They exceeded PCI Express power specs, or at least what used to be the power spec was 300 watt maximum per card. And I remember it was a big deal when AMD exceeded that with something a few years ago, and everybody complained. Well, now Nvidia is doing it. 320 for the 2080, and I think they've said 350 for the 3090. So yeah, I mean they're going to be power hungry. I'm not so much worried about them for a single card. Like a 750 watt power supply is not a big deal. There's probably a lot of higher quality 650 watt power supplies that would handle, half their wattage being video card just fine. But that is a potential issue when we talk about scaling up to 4 GPUs.
Oh yeah.
4 3090s, let's say. Now you're talking 1400 watts just for the GPUs, and the biggest power supplies that I've seen at least are 1600 watts.
Because if you go more than if you go more than 1600 watts, you're beyond a 15 amp breaker circuit.
Yeah. So that could get interesting because usually the systems you're going to have 4 GPUs on are going to have a beefy CPU, and the motherboard's going to need a lot, and all the other stuff in the system. So that's going to get interesting. Let's say
we'll have a return of dual power supplies.
Oh no!
You guys remember those days?
Hey, I was just talking about reducing complexity. Well, I know
you have to specifically go to separate circuits. You have to have an electrician come in. Or 220 volt. We need to get some 220 volt.
Yeah, let's just get the US to convert to 220. We had I know Don, you and I talked plenty of times in the past about it's not even so much how much performance on a card, how much performance in a box. It's how much performance per circuit. Yes. When you're talking to workstations or developers, that's a big deal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That came up on the Hacker News comments on my post last night. Sony was talking about the power usage because the cards use a lot of power, but if two 3080s at 700 watts can replace 4 2080 Ti's, that would be a kilowatt.
Yeah.
Then you're actually getting a power savings from these cards. So it is a little bit. It looks like it has potential to be more efficient for power per compute.
Yeah. We may end up seeing, like, even in like industrial type workstations or even in servers, that like triple card is the new standard.
That's what I was going to say. That also fits a lot easier in a lot of tower systems.
Right.
So if we can get blowers, 3 blower cards, then suddenly the power is doable. So the space is a lot easier. You don't have to have a motherboard and chassis that have room for an extra slot. And that could be really interesting.
Yeah, anyone in our production department that's watching, I'm very sorry that we're talking about triple video cards.
Well, because even a lot of my stuff, like Davinci Resolve is the big one where we see multi GPUs, and we almost never do quad GPU. It's almost always triple, even for the people who have an infinite budget, and it's because you need other PCIe cards. So in the fact of like Resolve, you need a like a DeckLink card to go out to a color calibrated display. Because if anytime you're going through a GPU, you've got Windows messing with your colors. You've got Nvidia drivers messing with your colors. And it's all wrong. It's all terrible and awful. Even if you color calibrate your display, it'll just randomly. I mean, for like people at home, it's not a big deal. But if you're like someone actually color calibrating like the Star Wars movies, that's kind of a problem. So we never do more than triple anyway, because they need that slots for that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, going back to power for a minute, I wonder how much the new 12-volt standard will make a difference with these new power supplies. You're supposed to be able to achieve quite a bit better efficiency. Still, I don't know how comfortable I would be running.
Yeah, but that won't change the video card power draw, because those are just 12-volt anyway.
No, but it would change how much headroom you have, like how close to the limit you can get due to inefficiencies.
Yeah, well, now the new 12-volt power supply, everything's going to go through the motherboard at that point, right? Like nothing is going to run off the power supply.
Well, I would think that anything 12-volt could still go off the power supply.
Yeah, I doubt they'd want to route all 1600 watts through the motherboard.
See, that's what I was wondering. If it's all going through the motherboard, how many GPU slots are they actually going to give you?
Yeah.
I would bet that in these kind of situations, we'll end up with like you have a plug that goes to the motherboard. It converts everything for the motherboard because the motherboards have a lot of 3.3 volt and 5 volt. But then it has dedicated 12-volt lines to go to video cards. It would be my guess, just because that's pulling so much more power than the motherboard, and it doesn't need any voltage conversions anyway. Yeah. And then we just all forget about SATA and platter drives. Like those just go away, and we just do NVMe everything.
Yes.
Well, SATA, it would be a lot easier to power off the
Oh, yeah.
motherboard.
Yeah, that's low power. Yeah.
It's more a question of like how many connectors they're going to give you.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, I mean, not that many people do a whole bunch of drives anymore. I know some people do because they're like keeping old drives around, but more and more, like enclosures are becoming more accessible. That like you just get a $300 enclosure, put all 8 of your drives in there, and now it's not in your computer anymore, and it's just it goes over there, and it just moves from system to system. Because even if it's like USB 3, like who cares? You're running 8 platter drives. USB 3 is not saturated.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Well, it's good. Yeah, we don't have room in the computer anymore. The video card takes up half the space now.
Yeah.
Which was actually part of we just recently moved to the Defined 7 by Fractal, and very fortunate because it actually gives us more of that like length space for the video card, but it is at the cost of hard drives. Like in the R6, we could do some obnoxious number like 8 platter drives, and in the Defined 7, we can only do I think 3, but like that's fine. That meets all of the needs of our customers.
There's 8 terabyte NVMe drives, or they're supposed to be soon, or are we only to 4 now? I forget what we are. Storage isn't as interesting as like CPUs and GPUs because it's fast, yes, and then how much storage you need, well, it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, this flew by, but we are well over time. Any closing thoughts? Like the number one thing that you're excited about with this new launch?
Next week. 3090.
Yes.
Stay tuned. Okay.
3090s and cross your fingers for blower cards.
And multi-GPU.
Yeah.
Multi-GPU.
Okay. Well, there's a lot to keep watching for as we talk about 3090 and as we look at what's coming forward with Quadro. Lots to stay tuned with. We are only in the beginnings of this monumental shift that has been begun by the 3080. So, okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you for those who asked questions. We love engaging this way. This is, believe it or not, very enjoyable to us. The hour flies by. Stay tuned every Wednesday and Friday as we stream and as Houston's back to host. We do Workflow Wednesdays every Wednesday, where we bring in an industry expert from their field to talk through the work that they're doing. And then every Friday, we have our open office hour with labs, and we'll talk about this whole rolling launch that we're in the midst of. Lots to talk about as the weeks come on. So thanks for joining. We'll see you later.
See ya.